Well, good morning, good evening, everybody. And it's really a pleasure to be, well, it's a privilege to be invited to speak at the Centre of Excellence for the Digital Child. And some people on the call have probably heard us present some of the things that we're going to talk about before. Some of what we want to say is relatively new. The Play Observatory is hurtling towards the end of its funding period, sadly. So if you know of any benefactors that could keep us going, that would be great. Email me, or Kate, or both of us. We complete, the funding period ends in January, and we carry on with an exhibition in March, of which I'll tell you more about later on. So we're at the moment, we're in the emergence of data, really, and we're in that phase where we're turning to analysing as things are coming in. We have been in that for a while, actually, but we're now thinking about theorising it as well. So this seemed like a really good opportunity to talk with a wide range of people in the field about some of the things that we might be seeing, and to share our findings about it, and to, I guess, ask for help and have discussions on what we're doing. We don't pretend to know all the answers about this thing. I will do an introduction to the Play Observatory for you, keep that brief. I want to talk about how archives of play are things worth knowing, because the archival aspect of what we're doing is a really important part of what we're doing. We want to talk a bit about the learning from previous projects. And then Kate is going to discuss with you the methodological issues in a project where we're shifting studying play, being co-present with people, to studying play through the medium of, through being online, and how we have tried to overcome those issues. And she'll also take you through some of the fantastic data that has emerged through the survey of what children have been playing during pandemic times. I'll then talk a little bit about the case studies, the interviews, some of the data that's emerging from films, and other bits and pieces of data that are coming in. And then a little bit of theory at the end, which is appropriate to the socio-materiality strand of what this seminar series is about, thinking about theorising play as part of an everyday network of relations with particular inflections for the digital age. So this is the team. Myself and Kate work at UCL IOE with Michelle Cannon, second from left in the bottom row. And from Sheffield University, we have Dr. Julia Bishop and Kath Bannister, who are both archival researchers and experts, and have been really a key part of the team in putting together the collection, along with Dr. Yinka Olusoga, bottom left, a historian of children's play. And in the third spot from the left is Valerio Signorelli from University College London Centre for Advanced Spatial Analysis, who's been assisting with the website and with the really quite complicated nature of things behind the scenes, how you turn a social science research tool into an archival capture tool as well, the two bits of the research thing that have been joined together with his expertise. Bottom right is Peeps, our character who kind of works alongside us in collecting data from children. It's a multidisciplinary project, therefore, reflecting all of our interests. We put the proposal into the UKRI, Research and Innovation Unit, because they called for research projects which responded to the situation of COVID-19, most of which were funded to produce vaccines and cures and to investigate the really serious, big, immediate issues. But as we looked down the list of things that were being funded, we noticed that there was not much attention from this call, funded proposals, to examine children's play. And we think that play, we are very much believers in play as being central to human experience, not just for children. But in particular, in this time for children, the loss of amenity and the loss of social contact, in terms of face-to-face at least, seemed to us to be something that was worthy of study, and luckily they agreed. And the team reflects that social sciences view alongside an arts and digital humanities view of data collection. So we're looking at things that people have produced in response to their circumstances and their changed circumstances. So such things as videos, images that they've made, crafts, arts and crafts that they've done at home or in groups. And we've been interested in finding out things that they've done when they've gone back to school after lockdown and back home again, and how play has been inflected and affected by the pandemic and lockdowns. So it's synchronic and it's diachronic in time. And we want to, as Julia Bishop has said many times, put these fields and modes of inquiry in conversation with one another, the present in conversation with the past, and we are building an archive for the future. Hopefully, there'll be a time when we'll look back on this period and wonder what was going on. And this would be a kind of like a time capsule of that. And we think that recording and valuing play and what children tell us about play is important. Too much of the emphasis has been on learning loss, and we're thinking about play. I'm not going to dwell too long on this slide, but it is important. Oh dear, that's the phone going off. And it's still going off. Can you still hear me okay? Yes, okay, I'll carry on.
Can.
Thanks. So children's playground games in songs in the new media age. I don't think you'll even be able to edit that out. So let's just enjoy the moment of chaos. Was the first series of projects. And then we did Playing the Archive and Memory, Community and Mixed Reality Play. And then we're in the National Observatory of Children's Play. These have always contained partnerships between UCL and Sheffield University School of Education. And I should say, by the way, before I carry on, that phone never rings. So this is just a special moment in my life. And Sheffield University bring the expertise in the relationship of what we're studying to the archival collection of data, and also to the interpretation of the social aspects of children's lives through their connections to the Opie archive of children's games. So what have we been doing? We were funded from October 2020 onwards, and we began by designing the survey in order that it would be able to collect archival work. And then we moved into a phase of interviews and case studies. We've recently held a successful children's filmmaking workshop, which was coordinated by Michelle Cannon. And we're roughly so at the third point down on that list. And we are running a symposium in January 2022 to close the project. And we have some Australia-friendly times for that, as well as US-friendly and other parts of the world friendly times for that. So we will be publicizing that with you at some stage later on when we've confirmed speakers and so on. We are also going to be running an exhibition with the Victoria and Albert Museum. And the part of the museum that we're going to be working with used to be known as the Museum of Childhood. And if you visited London, maybe you've been there, but it's actually rebranding itself as Young V&A. And one of the key elements that they're going to have at the new Young V&A is a gallery devoted to play. So we're working quite closely with them on an exhibition of outputs and artifacts that have come in from the Play Observatory itself. And our publications are ongoing. And as you know, finding the time to write is the tricky part of being an academic, but we aim to overcome that. So I just want to position this slightly in terms of Playing the Archive, which some of you might have heard of before, which was a study of contemporary children's playgrounds, also in the light of the Opie archive. And in this, we were face to face with children, Kate and I in London, and Julia Bishop and Jackie Marsh with children in Sheffield. And what we found here was that play allows for the emergences of practices, identities, and conceptual building that are transformative. This is something that we know from play researchers in the past. We know that it's constantly constructed through action and derives from human agency. And we also know that it has an affective component, which is linked to identity development. We know that it's part of being well, and it's part of developing resilience in difficult times. What changes or becomes more amplified in lockdown, in periods where things have to change? How do children do that? How do families do that? And we proposed previously that we could see in children's play that there were laminates visible in the things that they did in the playground. Some of you will have seen us talk about this before, that they were laminated versions of life worlds, the folkloric imagination and ritual of children's play, the media remix and the inflection of play with media artifacts and texts and practices, and community building and community belonging. So we found it was a sophisticated set of activities that were codependent on both the materiality of being in a playground and playing sometimes with objects and artifacts, and that it was a dynamic site for making meaning and making some sense of what was going on through talk and interaction. Play was central to that. So what happens when those play spaces are no longer available? That was a key element of our research. So these were our 4 research questions, and this is going to be recorded. So I'm not going to read the slides out at this point because, you know, I do try to tell my own students not to read everything that's on the slide. But I would just say that the first question I will read out, because the key thing that we wanted to find out was how have children been playing during the pandemic. And in this, we were concerned with both online and offline play, analog and digital. From the initial outbreak of the virus throughout lockdown, during ongoing social distancing, and I should add, when they came back to school. So that is important. Online and offline is important to us. And it's important to us to think about these things as being co-present in children's lives in a kind of hybrid form. And so that is something that's really emerging as a key area of interest to us. So I'm not going to read the other 3 questions out. They'll be on screen and you can pause them if you're watching this back, because time is short. And I want to hand over to Kate to talk about how we designed the research in the project and some of the survey findings. Thanks, Kate.
Thanks, John. So on previous projects, as John has said, we were able to carry out the fieldwork on the ground and face to face. And we did that based around 3 kind of methodological approaches, really. So it was ethnographic, in that we were spending time in the playground in person for extended periods, getting to know the children, their routines, the rules, and building relationships with them. It was participatory, so we were recognizing that children are the experts of play, and we were trying to find ways to support them to become co-producers of the research. And it was multimodal, so we were recognizing that children's play and children's communication happens in multiple modes, which means we need to provide a range of methods to offer varying means of expression. So we had the pleasure and the privilege of spending extended time in school playgrounds. And you can see here some of the methods that we used: field notes, photographs, video recordings, children producing artifacts like drawings and video tours, child-to-child interviews with each other. We were very much kind of within the play space and beside the children. But of course, when COVID arrived, we knew this was creating a really interesting, different, changing context for play. But it also brought with it restrictions. So school and playground closures, lockdown, social distancing, and so on, that made this on-the-ground fieldwork impossible. So we had to think together about how we could continue to research using some of these same principles in changing times. So could you go on to the next slide, John? Thanks. So we kind of asked ourselves, could we take the methodological principles of our earlier research, the ethnographic, participatory, multimodal qualities, and use them as the foundation for an online study? So we did that by making use of remote methods, including the online survey, online case studies that used Zoom interviews and remote production of artifacts, drawing and films. Next, please, John.
Ooh.
Oh dear. Thanks. And we took inspiration from many other researchers who were facing similar challenges during this time. So we tried to keep the essence of earlier methods alive while shifting online, and focusing as much as possible on changing the methods rather than the aim or the ethos of the research. And we tried to think ethnographically, despite there being restrictions on typical ethnographic fieldwork. And although we had to make several changes to our previous methods, we tried to be open to the potentials of online research, as well as the challenges and any kind of benefits that it might bring, as well as having to change it for these times. So the first phase was the online survey, and this was led by the team at Sheffield University, working with Valerio Signorelli from UCL. And it's a qualitative survey with 2 pathways through it. This was quite important to us. It was a challenge to put into practice, but we wanted to have a child pathway as well as an adult pathway. And on both of these pathways, the contributor is asked to share examples of play from the pandemic outbreak onwards, as well as answering a few demographic questions. So collecting the who, the where, the when, as well as the what. And that metadata is helpful then for cataloguing and archiving. And there was also the option for contributors to upload media files, so photos, drawings, audio recordings and videos as well. So what have we been collecting? Well, we've taken a very broad definition of play as being things children had done for fun and to pass the time from the outbreak of the pandemic onwards. We've been open to contributions from all around the world, and we've defined children and young people as being anyone under the age of 18, but also inviting adults to upload on their behalf. So teachers, youth group leaders, parents, and so on. And we use this character here, Peeps, who was co-designed with a 10-year-old. We've used him throughout the website and the survey to try and sort of address children, make the research a little bit more child-friendly in an attempt to seek their responses firsthand or supported by an adult, as well as inviting adults' own observations. And then the second phase has been in-depth case studies with 10 children so far, children who had contributed to the survey and whose parents had indicated that they might be willing to be engaged in further research. And we've invited them to be part of online interviews and the production of creative materials like drawings and films, which John is going to talk a bit more about. So across both of the survey and the case studies, we tried to ensure that the study kept this ethos of ethnographic, participatory and multimodal methodologies whilst switching to online methods. And of course, it has had both challenges and potentials. So we've actually just written 2 pieces for the SAGE Doing Research Online series, reflecting on our methods, a piece by John, Michelle and I talking about the case studies, and one by Yinka and Co at Sheffield talking about the survey. So of course there are challenges, and one main one, significant one, I think, being that online research can bias the study towards families with the hardware, software and internet connection that's needed to contribute in this way, so potentially reflecting digital inequalities. And in an attempt to address that, we did try to advertise the project using some flyers as well as online means. We invited survey contributions by post, and we supported organisations such as school and youth groups to add examples on behalf of diverse communities of children that they serve. Then another challenge was being able, sorry, if you could just go back, John.
I'll try.
Thanks. Another challenge was being able to develop face-to-face rapport with children and families, and also that challenge of capturing sensory, embodied, spatial experiences easily when you can't be physically present. And so we tried to overcome this with this use of multiple online methods, so including the survey, uploading of media, interviews, creation of artifacts, and so on, trying to generate multiple perspectives on play despite not being physically present with children in person. And then there were also some sort of practical challenges like Zoom. I'm not sure if you're watching the subtitles here and whether they're totally accurate, but Zoom's automatic transcription feature does struggle, especially with children's speech and when there's multiple speakers on a Zoom call. But then also online research did have its own affordances, significantly in terms of safety, the reach, the cost and the convenience, and also some kind of unanticipated benefits that we found to online interviews. So one being that actually it's interesting to see researchers being captured in the same recording frame as the participants. So rather than as traditionally kind of being behind the camera on a Zoom call, you know, you're still in the same frame, the camera's on you too. And we think that's kind of interesting for looking maybe reflexively at our own researcher roles in those kinds of interviews. And then we've also seen a kind of shift in power relations potentially. On a Zoom call, you know, researchers are shrunk to this on the screen to the same size as the children. And it's often been able to, we think, to have supported kind of these quite intimate insights into home environments without physically intruding on children's spaces. So if you can move on, John, and we'll look at some examples in the survey data. So it is ongoing, we're still collecting, we're still analysing. So these are kind of an initial flavour and some initial impressions grouped around loose themes. And I do want to point out as well that we're trying at the moment, the Sheffield team in particular is working to make the collection accessible online. So you should be able to have a look at these examples eventually in your own time in a bit more detail. So the first theme that we'll look at, we kind of have noticed that although children have spent periods in lockdown and experiencing significant restrictions, it's important to kind of say that play hasn't stopped. We've seen examples like outdoor play, play with family members, taking up new hobbies, playing video games, reading, crafts, puzzles, and so on. You can see a few of those here. So I think we might be able to speculate that play was escapism, or it was distraction from the here and now, and that play is an important part of well-being during a time of uncertainty. We've also seen several examples of play referencing and responding to the contemporary context in their play. So there's an example here, a child playing cafe and setting it up to be socially distanced, a child making masks for her toys and talking about them going for their vaccinations. This model of a boy, bottom left, that he's made of the coronavirus out of found materials, and so on. So also PPE, cures, hand sanitizer, hospitals, and so on as kind of themes and features of children's play. And I think this highlights that, sorry, yes, that's fine, John, that play is a way children respond to and make sense of the world around them. The changes in their social worlds are being reflected in their play worlds. And so maybe we can say that these examples show play as a means of experimenting with the new normal in safely distanced ways. Play gives a chance for exercising agency and control. And it's also a form of multimodal communication. So beyond what can easily be expressed in language, this shows children's awareness and understanding of change, and sometimes their emotional responses to the virus too. Looking at this bottom right picture, for instance, that the child's drawn of the outside world, and its the elements there are crying. And then we've seen several examples of children finding ways to play despite the restrictions and challenges by changing old games and also devising new ones. So there's an example here of changing a TIG game, actually Australian example, changing Tiggy to be tagging with their elbows. Or on the top right here, an example from the UK of children now playing shadow tag when they play together. And Julie Bishop has written a really great blog post, and I think she's going to write an academic piece on this about sort of the changes in TIG and tag games throughout the pandemic. We've also seen changes like finding safe spaces to play while shielding and in quarantine, finding ways to play play at a distance, so making COVID snakes in parks out of pebbles, and displaying teddies in windows while on walks, so that kind of playful connection despite distance and separation. And also many examples of digital play, which I think we can say is a kind of intensification of an existing trend in children's play. But this has included things like video games and online play with distant friends in virtual worlds like Minecraft and Animal Crossing. Also a lot of play through video call systems like Zoom and Skype. So just, examples relating to quizzes, board games and bingo played over video calls. And also what I think is particularly interesting is kind of new forms of hybrid play. So an example at the bottom here is a little boy of 4 years old who's playing Doll's House over Zoom with his grandma, and she's giving instructions at the other end and playing with the doll's house in her house. And also a lovely example, which isn't up here, but of some children playing hide and seek with their grandparents on an iPad. So the grandparents would get hidden in a drawer or under the bed on the iPad, and the children would have to go and find them. So kind of new creations of play under the context. And so, as I said, it's kind of early days in the data, but I think we can say that we're witnessing children's creativity and adaptability to devise and change games in response to the constraints around them. And the findings really point to the kind of complexity of digital play too, and its place within contemporary childhood. So very much troubling kind of simplistic notions of screen time. Instead, it's highlighting the kind of blurred boundaries around digital and non-digital practices and the creativity that's involved in them. Pass back to you, John.
Thanks very much, Kate. As Kate mentioned, we asked if people would be prepared to be interviewed by us as well, so we could take a slightly deeper dive into the settings at home. And we have recorded 10 interviews, and we have 3 more planned. So it's purposive sampling from the survey responses by us as well. We wanted to get a geographical, gender and ethnicity spread as far as possible. And we've got some really fabulous interview data, which is going to take us many months to analyze properly. So we've got 8 children aged from 1 to 13. Actually, the slide needs updating because we have a 19-year-old looking back at her 17-year-old self in the data as well. Parents have been approached via email, and parents and carers have been present during the interviews. We sent out pre-interview background questions. We conducted a semi-structured Zoom interview with them. They lasted between 30 minutes and in one case an hour, when we really couldn't stop the children speaking to us. A group of children known as the home cool kids. If you follow the blog, you'll understand why we couldn't stop them talking to us. As so lively and so excited and interested in the various things they were doing. So the transcripts have been automatically generated, then edited. And the other version of qualitative data that we have very recently, thanks to the work of Michelle Cannon, is a series of films. We have 4 films that were commissioned by volunteer children to make about their pandemic play experiences. And so top left, we have All by Myself, which is made by a 10-year-old girl, an entirely silent film about the different zones of the house. We have top right, The Park Police, which is a toddler policing people sitting still and having picnics instead of exercising. That film was made by her 10-year-old brother. Bottom left, the film made by a 19-year-old about her twin sister's attempt to become an actress, aged 17 and 18, when various theatre events that they were going to be taking part in were cancelled. She made a fantastic drama out of that. And bottom right was a video project made as a response to the 10-year-old boy being in 5 days of isolation in his own home with coronavirus and attempting to play a board game called Guess Who through the door with his mum on the other side, which is an incredible piece of footage. We hope to put these on display as part of the exhibition. Kate mentioned the interesting shift in power relations in interviewing online. And I don't know if anybody on the call would like to comment on this later, but we found this to be a really interesting aspect of the interview process. Of course, we acknowledge the equality situation here, so not everybody has the equipment at home to do this. But for the parents that do, we found that the children were very, very much in control of large sections of the interview. The 2 frames on the left-hand side here were from a child who actually has quite a serious syndrome called charge syndrome. And she was an incredibly lively character, as you can see, leaping over the furniture, bottom left. And she took control of the laptop camera angle as well to cut her mum out when she wanted to say, no, this is what I want to say. So there's a kind of shift in power relations here. The interview on the right-hand side of the 2 pictures, there are 2 boys aged nearly 4 and nearly 2. And it was at the time of the recording, and it was not an interview. We were kind of taken through the house with the parent following with an iPad as the children led us through their pandemic play inside a bear cave that they'd made of a duvet over some chairs. And we've seen that dens actually are highly significant creations during the pandemic. So that wasn't so much an interview as being immersed in the children's play from the perspective of the materiality of being led through by an iPad through the space of the house, which was a really different and interesting way of conducting ethnographic online research. We asked children to produce a picture of themselves playing during the pandemic. We've not had so much data back from this data set, but we have a boy who made a fantastic rap video called COVID Gone. And we asked him to see if he could produce a picture, a diagram of some of the ways in which he'd been playing. And what he ended up doing was producing a schematic of the play that he'd been doing. And then it was broken up, we felt, when we analyzed it, into various nodes, which were positioned through the space of the house and the garden and the online spaces as well. Kind of not a hub and spoke thing, but that each part of this could become the center of some nexus of play that was going on, whether, feeding ducks and scoring goals in the park, cycling by the river, the outside world, zeroing in, and the diagram even does this, it zeroes in on the home as being the center of the location, playing Minecraft and at the same time doing baking spending time with family, watching TV. This hybridity and flow between online and offline worlds we think is really interesting. And as Kate has mentioned previously, some or a lot of our data challenges the binary of good times being had away from the screen and bad times on the screen. This unhelpful binary of good and bad with on-screen and off-screen play, which I know many researchers on the call have also been talking about and challenging as well. So overlaid with our research design is this awareness that we need to move into theorizing things a little bit now. And I very much enjoyed this center presentation that I attended a couple of months ago, I think now, with Kathy Burnett and Guy Merchant talking about the different kinds of critical literacy frames that could be placed over events, literacy events. And so in a sort of parallel triangle of ethnographic, participatory, multimodal, we've got practices, networks, and identities. And I think what we want to say is, and this is a very wordy slide, is that we're beginning to explore this network of relations. So we don't have anything hard and fast here, and your help in interpreting them would be welcome. But we think that really research spaces are third spaces of play before and during COVID-19. And there's an interconnectedness between the nodes and the spaces in which children play. But essentially, it's a relational value. So we're not privileging one over another like a kind of simplified version of the discourse does. And excuse me, as we've noted before, the evidence we're collecting speaks back to power and allows us to ascribe value to the moments of play during the pandemic and to the apparently ephemeral. So in our country at the moment, we have this situation, and possibly you do in Australia as well, there's a lot of educational catch up. And sadly, in our country, it seems to boil down to accelerated Ofsted inspections, just heaping more and more unnecessary pressure on children and teachers. So I'm going to move on because you can read that slide by pressing pause on the recording, and just say that we have some concluding thoughts on emergent findings. So first of all, as you've seen, we've collected evidence of many, many forms of play. Physical play, play with objects, symbolic play, pretend play, and games with rules, as you'd expect from the typology from David Whitebread. And interestingly, in working with the Victoria and Albert Museum curator, we've collectively produced themes that have emerged from these collected artifacts. And it's certainly something that Katie Canales, the curator, noted, that these seem to be falling into 4 domains in the message hierarchy, which we'll be playing with in our own analysis, namely around situations of construction, imagining, exploring, and innovating. All of these things that you see in play, but what we're talking about is the way that the pandemic has inflected these. And across all domains of activity, we've got strong direct evidence of the power of play in times of crisis and uncertainty. So we're committed to this notion of play as being a response and necessary to well-being and to developing resilience. We've also begun to explore the nature of hybrid play, as I mentioned. And we have an impressive range now of films from single shots to edited productions. And most of these are direct personal testimony of complex emotions and issues. And we've been stunned by the quality of some of the productions and have gone back to ask, are these really the work of the children involved? And they are. So our research is also involved evaluating impacts on methodology of online interviewing, as we've been saying, and power relations on screen. So there's plenty to say, and there are plenty of possible and potential theoretical frameworks to employ. And we look forward to a good debate in the academic community about how we work with these. We have our own thoughts, but it's really the value of seminars and situations like this is that we can discuss them with you. And we hope that some of you will be able to come to our symposium where we'll be talking in more depth about each of the phases of the project. And we have a series of guest speakers, including from Australia, who will be talking about the work that they've done during the pandemic. We're aware that we're not the only group doing something like this. There's some references and further related reading. I can supply the slides for those for your students if you would like. And these are our contact details. So do follow us on Twitter. Kate has been doing a fantastic job of managing the Play Observatory Twitter feed, which has got well over 1,000 followers from a standing start a few months ago. So it's a really nice hub for us to relay conversations that are happening elsewhere in the world about this issue. And we have our own personal Twitter feeds as well. And please do visit the project website and blog, because it's a fast moving thing, and there's so much great content on there that's been produced by people who've been interested to write for us, as well as by the fabulous team members with whom it's been an absolute privilege, honestly, a privilege to work with during these last few months. So that's it. I think we're on slightly over time.
No, not at all. We're very flexible, and we want these to be actually, rich discussions. So thank you so much for that to both of you. Just amazing in terms of how many thoughts and jottings and thinkings are running around. I did want to say just thank you to you, John, to start with, for demonstrating such a commitment to thinking about data across time and space in your little organisation there, of actually having a home phone ring. That's something I haven't heard for a long time.
It never rings, Annette. I didn't even know we still had it. It's like a blast from the past. I mean, I'd like to say I'd done it deliberately, but I did not. I think I felt at one point I should jump up and just take it out of the wall.
I'm sure it was somebody attempting to sell you something, or who needs to tell you that you've done something wrong with the tax department. But anyway, so thanks for that. Look, I was also really interested in your discussions around play and how play hasn't stopped during the pandemic. And I think for me, it really highlights the importance of research in the current context, doesn't it? Because if we were to listen to the media or to politicians, we might actually assume that children shouldn't, or at least didn't, play during the pandemic. So something that's quite interesting, I think, is the different ways that you're using or curating or the data that you've been collected. So could you discuss just a little bit more about the use of archival data and relevant research methods, and then coming to use the data in different ways, so for research and analysis, but also for public display and exhibition?
Okay, perhaps if I start, and Kate, if you want to jump in with anything I forget. But I think that one of our things that is really important to us is capturing the ephemeral nature of play. Because play is ephemeral, or can be, people assume a value judgment over it. So this is the debate that play workers and teachers of early years have been having down the centuries, really, down the decades. And there's an increasing colonization of children's earliest years at school by the curriculum for no good reason. And in countries where they don't do this, they're very successful. We just have to look at Finland, for example. So in general, even aside from the pandemic, there is this debate about children's play. So we ascribe huge value to play. Now, in thinking about archives, in recent times, in the last 10 years, the slide where the phone was ringing shows a kind of line back through the various research there's been into something called the Opie archive. And Peter and Iona Opie, from the end of the Second World War right up until the end of the 20th century, were collecting examples of play because they saw a value to it, and their collection is vast. And it's been a mission of Julia Bishop, Jackie Marsh, Kath Bannister, and Yinka and others up in Sheffield to catalogue this. And we have a project with the British Academy where it's still ongoing to catalogue it and throw this wide open. So we see a value, the Opie saw a value in cataloguing and archiving play. And then we saw a value in playing the archive, in updating that further. And then the next step is to think, what about pandemic play? And can that also be archived so that people could see there was a value in these times of play in particular, which will strengthen, our feelings about play overall. Kate, did you have any thoughts on that?
No, I think you've done a great job. That's perfect.
Okay.
Well, I have a good deal of other questions, which I hope we'll get to engage with and talk over coming months. But I do see that in the chat, there's quite a list of questions. And so I'm going to throw it back to Michael to let him invite some of the audience to actually have some of their questions and queries commented upon. Thanks, Michael.
Great. Thanks so much, Annette. And So I'm actually going to read a couple of these questions out as requested by the people who have asked them. And we'll just see how we go for time. We might have time to come back to one of your other questions, Annette, as well. So the first question comes from Davina, who is in India. And she's referring to, I think, the slides where you were outlining the research questions. And it says the last question about interdisciplinary perspectives helping us understand aspects of play better is so cool. I'm in the process of writing my thesis now on young people and social media in India, and boy, is that theory patchwork quilt a task. Could you please tell us more about that, if not already covered in the rest of the presentation? So it's in reference to your last research question, I think. Mm-hmm. John and Kate.
Okay. Kate, did you want to talk about being interdisciplinary a bit?
Yeah, I think, so we're bringing together John and I as sort of social scientists with a tradition of education research, ethnographic research, and then combining that with the team at Sheffield, who are interested particularly in the kind of historical angles on play, folkloric perspectives. And it has been interesting at points that, you know, designing the tools and things, there have been these sort of moments where we work together fantastically and each offers in a different perspective, and also moments where we've sort of had to see where the other team is coming from. So one example being the survey, for instance, and how much data to collect about the contributors. So from a social science point of view, it's often sort of said, you know, anonymity is really important. You know, you don't want to sort of get too much personal data, whereas from the folkloric and historical perspective, we want to know as much about these people as possible, and we want to attribute the things that they've done to them. So actually anonymity would be kind of in conflict with that. So it hasn't always been a kind of easy, straightforward task. We've had to sort of think about the disciplinary traditions, but I think overall it's always really useful to work together in these ways, and it has enrich the project for us in that it's not just a sort of social science here and now project, but it does hopefully have this longevity to it, that people, play scholars of the future, will be interested in looking back on what we're collecting with a different lens. John, anything to add?
No, I think that's really good. And hello, Davina. And I think that when you're writing a PhD as well, and it depends on what phase you're in, but there is a phase of exploration, isn't there? And it is a different thing. It's a different thing to a research project, because what you will have to do ultimately is make a choice and make a kind of a sort of sense in which you have to combine the theories that you're working with into some kind of original vision and recombination of them. But if you're in that early kind of phase of the study, it's a nice time, it's a good time to be in, and that kind of exploratory phase. I sympathize if you're getting towards the middle and the end, you have to kind of make a decision about, because you can't cover everything, and at some stage it will come apart and people will pick holes in it. But what's great is being able to build new theory from some of this. So thinking about the ways in which you can bring different disciplines together. And I think that is one of the real strengths of this team. But I acknowledge that it's more problematic inside a doctoral study. I agree with you.
Okay, thanks so much. So Sarika, sorry, has asked a question, but I might give Sarika an opportunity to ask that question for themselves rather than me read it out, because they haven't specified for me to read it out. Sarika, thank you.
Thank you, Michael, and thank you to the team for a wonderful presentation. I just wondered regarding the data was collected online on Zoom and interviews and all of that. In terms of the analysis of the data, and I see those publications and really looking forward to reading them, was there an analytical framework in terms of analyzing the data that was collected via Zoom and all of that?
I don't mind, jumping in on this. So analysis is ongoing at the moment. We're still collecting data. So we haven't analysed across the whole data set. One thing we have done is John and I wrote a paper recently, it's in review at the moment, about children's digital play. So for that, it was a sort of thematic analysis across both sets and actually the drawings as well, to look for mentions of or examples of tools, software, or references to digital media. So that was the kind of first selection. And then it was kind of iterative thematic analysis from there, looking at you know, what technologies did they mention? And that was where the sort of finding about playing through Zoom and Skype came from, and so on. That was a key theme that kept coming up in those examples selected from the wider data set. What I think we will do eventually, and what I've done and John and I have done together in previous research, is small moments of micro-analysis too, sort of multimodal in-depth analysis. So we did that on the previous project, looking at a few examples of children's clapping games, where you really just take a very small fragment of data and look at the sort of bodily, gestural, facial modes of communication, as well as the language and so on. And I'm thinking that might be quite interesting to do to unpick this idea of power relations in interviews. So I'd really like to analyse that moment where the little girl moves the screen to focus on her, and the being taken into the den by the children and given a tour around the house and so on. I think there could be interesting sort of opportunities for microanalysis there. So that's a little bit about what we've done already and the plans for the future.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's going to be really interesting when we get the transcripts back, when you take something, an event, a video event, and you look at a page of text, and the ways in which that some of the more formal interviews will be analysed in the more traditional kinds of ways. But as Kate's pointed out, we're going to be counting on expertise in multimodal analysis, which Kate has, in looking at movement and embodiment and gesture in some of those other interviews where the transcripts will be of limited use, shall we say.
Absolutely. Expressions might speak louder than words.
Yes. Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. So we have a question from Gloria. So Gloria, would you like to ask your question yourself?
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much. I really enjoy your presentation, and I really like the idea of how this moment is historical, and we will come back and look at it, and how really thinking about children's play. So I think thank you so much for the presentation. I think my question, I'm going back to the chat to remember the question, but I think I mentioned that it is quite interesting that you're really thinking about play in the context of home and family, because that's where children have been. And the mapping, the drawings, the stories that you're sharing were really interesting. I was wondering, going a bit further, what do you think we can learn, or what can teachers learn from these in relation to play? Do you think it's a different way of looking at play from, you know, in the family context? What are the lessons, I guess, that you're learning from these, while I know you're still analyzing the data, but what are the lessons that you think are important for teachers to consider, I guess? So in terms of this exploration, I think it would be really interesting to think about that. Thank you so much, Kate and John.
Thank you. Kate, I don't know if you wanted to take that one from the point of view of the other project that you got as well.
Yeah, I mean, we didn't look at schools in this per se, like the case studies focused on the children at the home. So we don't have that picture of the school data. We have invited teachers to upload examples. So we have a few from teachers. But kind of knowing what I know about classrooms, yeah, from other studies, from other research, I think there is often a bit of a divide. I think that in homes, often children are, they're drawing on media kind of rapidly and readily. They are encountering a rich range of media texts. They are perhaps making media texts of their own. They are playing on screens with people far and near. They are innovating in their on-screen play. And I think that often gets narrowed in many classrooms, not all. There are some great teachers and schools, and probably some on the call, who are doing really interesting, inventive stuff with digital media and digital technologies and embracing digital play. But I think often it can, and play also more generally, kind of can get squeezed to the margins. And so I don't know that there is that sort of recognition of the hybridity of children's play, or kind of provision for it in classrooms. That would be an interesting follow-up study. But that's my kind of hunch, is that we can look to the ways and the kinds of technologies that children are engaging in at home and try to make that more connected to what they're doing in classrooms.
Yeah, it seems that it's richer, isn't it? Yeah, so I think those are the good lessons. So thank you, Kate, for your comments.
Okay. Did you want to add anything, John?
No, I think you covered it very well. Thank you.
Great. I think we probably have time just for one last question. So this is from Kenneth Pedersen at the University of Oslo, and he's asked me to read it out. So you both mentioned the blurred boundaries between digital and analog. Do you have any thoughts about how to move beyond this dualism? It seems to me that relational ontologies are often used to understand this, but as a community, we often revert back to conceptualizations that rely on dualism. For example, hybrid play or third space.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting.
Yeah. Well, first, Kate, and I'll
jump in quickly. Yeah, this is something that's on my mind at the moment. A piece that I found really interesting on this is Jamin et al.'s paper about the post-digital play. That kind of comes from a video game perspective, so not specifically focusing on children's play, but I do quite like this idea that maybe children themselves don't really think, now I'm going to be online, now I'm offline, maybe they're sort of always online, maybe screens are sort of often there at the periphery or more centrally. And so, yeah, perhaps in decades to come, we won't be talking about digital play or hybrid play. It will just be play, and it will be impossible to think of it as any other way. So yeah, those are sort of my reflections. And I think for me, I'm at the moment sort of thinking about how multimodality and socio-materialism can kind of intersect together to provide a helpful lens on this. So multimodality looking at kind of the affordances of modes and whether they're digital or not. And then the socio-material lens sort of showing how they connect and are embedded with other spaces and practices and materials. That's what I'm pondering about, but I think it's a really good question.
Yeah, I think so as well. And I think this is at the forefront of what we're thinking about in terms of theory building. And it goes back to the presentation that Kathy and Guy gave in this centre, where they spoke about a network of relations. That's what I was quoting in the slide. And also in their book, Undoing the Digital, where they really are getting into the heart of exploring literacy events in terms of this network of relations between material and immaterial, or digital, not immaterial. What Kathy does is she says immaterial with a bracket around the im and then the material. So she figured it out from there. Third spaces are not binaries though. And third spaces are where a product is, where meaning is produced out of the interaction between two other spaces, but they could be two or more spaces. I've had this discussion many, many times. And I don't think it's as simple as saying there's one space, there's another, and then they meet. If you're a teacher in a classroom now, and you're working with digital materiality and with physical artifacts, you see this changing the whole time, and the center of it changes the whole time. And I know, Michael, you've written a lot about this, and it's a fascinating field to be working in, Kenneth. So that's a really good question, and we're thinking about it all the time.
Great, thanks so much, John and Kate. And we are right on time, and we do have some other questions that we haven't got to, but I'd please encourage you to perhaps put them to the Play Observatory Twitter account if you'd like to do that, or I think both John and Kate have indicated that they're happy to be contacted as well to answer any other questions. But I would just like to finish by saying thank you so much for taking the time to present to us today and for answering our questions. It's such a fantastic project. I've got 1,001 questions I could follow up with as well, and will at some stage. And I'm looking forward to hopefully coming along to the event that you're running early next year as well. I think that will be really interesting. So at this point, we normally all turn our cameras on and open our microphones so that we can give you a proper clap. So I think that's what we'll do at this point.
Thanks very much. Lovely to see you, everybody. Wish we were in person.
Yeah.
Indeed. It's always so hard to speak to those little black boxes there across the top, isn't it?
Yeah, one day we'll all be together again. Thanks very much, everyone.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone, for attending.
Thank you, Annette. Thanks, Michael.
Thank you.